All right, so let's start this broadcast with the big story that we are tracking in WION at this hour. Tensions between India and China are on the rise. The two giant neighbours have had yet another skirmish, and this time it is in India's eastern state of Arunachal Pradesh. Briefing the Indian Parliament, the Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh has said that the Indian Army had resisted an attempt by China to change the status quo at the line of actual control in the Tawang sector. Listen in to what Rajnath Singh had to say.
9 दिसंबर 2022 को पीएलए ट्रुप्स ने तवांग सेक्टर के यांगसे एरिया में लाइन ऑफ एक्चुअल कंट्रोल पर अतिक्रमण कर स्टेटस को एक तरफा बदलने का प्रयास किया। चाइना के इस प्रयास का हमारी सेना ने दृढ़ता के साथ सामना किया है अध्यक्ष महोदय, और इस फेस ऑफ में हाथापाई भी हुई है। भारतीय सेना ने बहादुरी से पीएलए को हमारी टेरिटरी में अतिक्रमण करने से रोका और उन्हें उनकी पोस्ट पर वापस जाने के लिए मजबूर कर दिया अध्यक्ष महोदय। इस झड़प में दोनों ओर के कुछ सैनिकों को चोटें भी आई हैं और मैं इस सदन को अवगत कराना चाहता हूं कि हमारे किसी भी सैनिक की न तो मृत्यु हुई है और न ही कोई गंभीर रूप से घायल हुआ है।
The face-off, in fact, took place on the 9th of December at about 3 a.m. local time. And according to reports that have come in, at least about 3 Indian Army units and almost 600 Chinese soldiers were in fact present at the time of the clash. The Defence Minister further added that the Indian Army in fact pushed the Chinese back. The PLA soldiers who engaged in the incursion attempt were pushed back by the Indian Jawans, and both Indian and Chinese soldiers ended up suffering injuries in this skirmish. Subsequently, the local commander of the army held a flag meeting with his Chinese counterpart on the 11th of December. In the meeting, India has said that the Chinese side was asked to maintain peace. New Delhi has said that it has also raised the matter with the Chinese side at diplomatic level as well. But will the government this time take a stern action against China? Because the face-off in Arunachal's Tawang sector is not the first one. A similar such transgression had taken place in the month of June in 2016, when around 250 PLA soldiers had transgressed into the area. But no clashes had been reported back then. In 2020, clashes in Galwan took India and China in a completely different direction. The clashes in eastern Ladakh along the line of actual control left 20 Indian soldiers dead. There were casualties on the Chinese side as well. And this was one of the bloodiest skirmishes between the two sides in over 45-year-long history. Now, despite multiple rounds of military-level talks to try and diffuse the tensions, there have been no signs that China is sincere in resolving this dispute. In fact, it has only been provoking India further, and China plans to expand areas in the periphery on the lines of the Chinese dream projected by the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Now, the question, of course, is how far can India, of course, resort to diplomatic level of talks? For how long can India stay silent on Chinese provocations, and for how long can India resist giving a free hand to its forces? These, of course, are some pretty important questions. But bear in mind that at the time when this transgression was attempted by the Chinese, the Indian army responded very firmly and pushed the Chinese back. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, is unfolded at the line of actual control and as to how things could, of course, proceed from here, we're being joined by Mr. Jitendra Ocha, who is a former intelligence officer and also a geopolitical expert. Now, Mr. Ocha, what has happened at the line of actual control? Some people would say, considering what has been happening over the course of the last few years in terms of how China has been trying to change the status quo at the line of actual control, do you think this was surprising at all that an incident of this nature has now taken place?
Not at all. I think much before this 2020 Galwan also, while speaking with a group of intellectuals and experts, I had said that it's only a matter of time. And this was likely to come under Xi Jinping's era itself. The way he was decimating his political opponents, the way he was quoting controversies. And we have recently seen how he has decimated whatever little structure of collective leadership that has been built in China. So it's always very natural for an autocrat, to rake up issues like this, be aggressive and belligerent with neighbors to consolidate himself. The way he has altered the composition of even Standing Committee of Politburo. So this was very much expected. He had carried out very restructuring of military also, creating 5 commands, and maximum emphasis has been given on Western Command, which looks on the Indian side. So
Right.
this kind of thing was inevitable, and we are going to face more of these aggressions in days to come.
Absolutely, indeed. In 2017, it was the standoff at the Doklam Tri-Junction. In 2020, it was the Galwan clash. And what we've witnessed in Tawang is, of course, a skirmish which could have actually been way more serious than what it has resulted in. Considering this being the track record in the course of the last 5 years, do you think China is up to something, Mr. Oja, that there could be a bigger plan which Xi Jinping has been hatching up? Because you remember recently, after he was endorsed as the leader of the Chinese nation for a third unprecedented time, he had said that the PLA should prepare for a war.
Absolutely. Not only at this point of time, but even earlier he has been talking about it. He's talking about winning wars in every theater, not only one theater. And we have seen how aggressive he has been in the South China Sea, how aggressive he has been with smaller neighbors in that area. So India is one country which can potentially threaten Chinese agenda of hegemony. The way they have developed their weapon systems also, they have been trying to tell Americans indirectly, not directly though, that this is one area where they have to dominate and Americans have to restrict their sphere of influence on other side of Atlantic. The way they have managed to build up bases, one base we are talking about, but the way they have managed to build up some kind of support structure in whole of Africa, Central Asia and other regions. So he has a very grand design about China, an imperial China, and he considers himself an emperor. So given his track record, we have to be very careful that Xi Jinping may even inflict a severe blow to Chinese aspirations as well, but he is likely to be very belligerent as long as he is not convinced that there will be very high consequences for China. I don't think he's going to stop.
Right. Now, over the course of the last several decades, analysts within India have spoken about the Chinese strategy of salami slicing. What China every time does is it tries to change the status quo. It tries to push the boundary towards the Indian side every single time it resorts to this kind of an incursion. Is this something similar to that was attempted, or do you think that there is a bigger game plan at hand? Because China, quite frankly, does not recognize the line of actual control. It says that the McMahon line, which demarcates the borders between India and China, was imposed on China at a time when the Chinese nation was weak, and therefore it does not have to abide by it at a time when it is strong.
Fact is that Chinese have a very unique kind of strategic psyche, and they have been believing, not only Xi Jinping, but successive rulers of China, that as a civilization, they have been expanding, and they have been expanding at the cost of India. Tibet had shared only 300 years of association, and real book which talks about Chinese ancient civilization, Sichi, it referred to Tibetans and people in Xinjiang or Eastern Turkestan as nomads. They had no connection with Chinese civilization, which was a very small civilization. So these people were never Chinese. We were occupied by foreign powers. And that's how our connection with both Tibet, which was culturally and civilizationally a part of India, and so was Eastern Turkestan. So that's how our connection was snapped, and they have been expanding. But Xi Jinping is a little different. He may not believe in salami slicing. He may be waiting for an opportunity to change status quo in a much bigger way, because he has very grand delusions about himself as well as about his own country. He has been mocking even the United States that they are a country with barely 250 years of history, whereas China is the greatest civilization of all times. So given his insanity and given whatever is going on in his mind, we have to be prepared for something more dramatic. We can't be looking at history to assess future. So we have to be more careful. This is what I would say.
Absolutely, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jitendra Oja, for joining us and getting us all those insights.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.